And we're live. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Man with Purpose. Today, I'm joined by Nic Warner. Nic specializes in sacred intimacy. He's a men's work facilitator, a breathwork instructor, a plant medicine practitioner, amongst many other things. I'm incredibly grateful and incredibly privileged to be able to have this conversation with Nic today. Nic, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. Normally, I start these conversations with just doing a quick check-in. So I'll just invite you to take a deep breath and share whatever is present for you right now.
I just finished a little embodiment practice. So I'm a little bit sweaty, but grounded, and quite relaxed.
I too finished a rather intense jiu-jitsu session today, so everything after that seems to be relatively easy. So I'm also very grateful to be doing these conversations. So again, thank you. Okay, I'm curious to know a little bit more about you. I read a little bit on the website. Sounds like you have we've been living multiple lives, I think. I'm curious to know a little bit about you or Nic, maybe before you kind of embarked on this conscious learning or conscious path of growth.
Okay, so I guess the path really started about 5 years ago, where it wasn't just an idea in my head, but it was something that I strategically planned and initiated into my life. Prior to that, I live in Berlin, and if you've ever been to Berlin, it's quite a fantastic city if you like to party. So for quite a few years, I was into drugs and alcohol, and this came as don't get me wrong, it was quite amazing and a whole lot of fun, but it also came, the deeper reason for it was I was numbing myself from feeling what I should have been feeling, which was I was just really unhappy with life. I was married to my best friend and to a really beautiful woman, but I had no concept of how to truly open up to emotional intimacy, and I was avoidant, and so I was also addicted to porn, and I had all these methods of numbing myself from actually feeling. And this, if you go back even further, it was because I didn't have the guidance when I was younger to really step into my masculine, to step into manhood. So although I had a man's body, I was psychologically still a boy. And yeah, I had an amazing relationship with my father, but it wasn't always the case. And he wasn't able to show me when I was younger emotionally how to be a man, because he didn't know himself. So I kind of started from behind the eight ball. I was fortunate enough to have a very beautiful relationship with both my parents. I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but even still, I didn't receive what I needed to. So being completely lost and kind of without purpose, I found that numbing myself rather than really tuning in and feeling it was at the time it was the easiest thing to do, but subsequently that ended in a whole lot of pain. Because as soon as you take the Band-Aid off, then holy shit, you start to feel the real depth of your pain and your angst and your fear, and yeah, it becomes it's quite something.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of those things that you said. Being in a relationship and totally have no clue how to be in a relationship with myself first of all, let alone with another human being. And same thing, addictions to alcohol, a very early age when I was in a gang. It wasn't even an addiction. I think it was just the peer pressure and the social pressure of having a place to belong. And it just so happened that everybody was drinking then. So I was like, okay, if that's the ritual for me to be accepted in this group, then so be it. But pornography was a big part for me. And again, exactly like you said, to numb the pain. It seemed like numbing that pain was much more bearable than the facing the reality, which was, wow, we need to make some serious changes here.
Yeah, and the alcohol is a difficult one because it's so socially acceptable. From the age of 15, I started to drink, and I wouldn't say that I was an alcoholic, but for 15 years, I don't think I went longer than 2 weeks without being drunk. And sure, maybe I'd just have one beer on a Monday night, and then maybe 3 on a Wednesday, and then the Saturday I'd ride myself off. But as soon as that realization came of like, actually, this is really not helping, and I haven't stopped doing this for so long. It was easy enough for me to stop. I went traveling, and I would, whenever somebody was there, they'd be like, oh, let's have a beer. I'd be like, no, I'm good. So, but it's so ingrained in us socially. And some of my older friends, when they found out I'd be taking psychedelics, they'd be like, oh, you're into drugs. I was like, yeah, dude, but you drink every weekend still. You get wasted drunk and you smoke cigarettes, but it's socially acceptable. So it's deemed as okay.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's actually, I mean, alcohol is the most dangerous drug in the world if you look at the statistics. So yeah, alcohol's it's a difficult one, and then especially for guys with no purpose, porn is just the devil. It's because it extracts the energy that we need to conserve to be able to discover or to reveal that purpose. But we're so constantly depleted because it's so easy to just click on some porn and jerk off. It does so much damage, and guys just have no clue.
I meant to what you said, both on the side of the alcohol, which, you know, like you said, it's socially acceptable. I lived in the UK for nearly 8 years or so before I went to Thailand. That's a purely drinking culture, and it's not me judging it. It's just, if you want to belong, that's kind of the social circle. I mean, obviously I'm generalizing here, but for the most part, you know, a huge chunk of alcohol is involved there, which is like, okay, let's get wasted on Friday, let's get wasted on Saturday, and then Sunday is just like recovering, and it's a repetitive cycle, which is a vicious one.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're kind of understanding all of this. You need to make a huge shift, because I'm sure, you know, people that are listening right now, both men and women, probably are at some stage there. Maybe they don't want to admit it. They're not as conscious or brave or as awake. Everybody's on their own journey, of course. I'm curious, what happened afterwards? You really reached this kind of huge realization that, oh shit, like something needs to change.
My wife had an affair, basically, and that was the tipping point, or the wake up call, I guess. Because I realized that all of my happiness was placed on somebody else, like it was in somebody else's hands. And once I realized that, I realized, you know, how catastrophic that had been for my entire life. And then some things happened. I'd spent the next 12 months kind of working and figuring out that I needed a purpose, and that what I was doing, I was working as an architect. It absolutely didn't align with what I wanted to be doing, which was more illustration kind of things. So at some point I was like, fuck it. And I booked a ticket to Costa Rica, I think, in the beginning, and I was going to go away for 5 weeks. And then 5 weeks turned into 7.5 months, wow. Which turned into 3.5 years in total. But for that first 7.5 months, I had no plan. It was, I'm going to dedicate this time to doing only those things that make me happy. And then it was meditating, yoga, and drawing. So every day I would just, like, I'd go to, in the very beginning, I had a plan of, I'll go to Guatemala for 2 weeks, and then I'll go to here for 2. And as soon as I got there, I realized that having a plan was absolutely pointless, because, I dropped so deeply into the flow that the universe is just like, okay, now you go here, and now you're going to meet this person, and now you're going to do this breath work, and now you're going to do this plant medicine. And then suddenly it was just like my entire energy started to shift. Like, if you dedicate time to doing the things that you love, it's self-love, and you raise your frequency. And as soon as you raise your frequency, you start to attract more of that of which you desire and that which you need. And my entire life shifted. And I was dipping my toes into certain things. So I did my first 10 days of silence, and then I spent my first theater in the jungle in the Amazon. And then at some point I'd had enough, and I was lonely. I was like, all right, this is good, but actually I want to go back, and I want to see if my marriage will still work, and I want to be with my friends, and I want to do all this kind of thing. And if I know that that's not correct, there'll be a sign. But I still had no real direction. I was like, I'm just going to go back and see what happens. And I went back, and I got a clear sign that you haven't finished. And I was back in Berlin for 6 months before I went, and I saved up, and then I went traveling for 1.5 years and just went far deeper into everything that I had done previously. So spent a lot of time in silence and darkness, and went back to the jungle, spent a lot of time in Peru. Really started to learn the most effective forms of healing that I received. I started to learn to be able to then help others. Because when I was back the first time, somebody said to me, I wish I could do what you do and just give up everything and move to the jungle. I was like, oh, you can. And she's like, no, I've got responsibilities. I've got a mortgage, I've got a family, I've got this, I've got that. It's like, okay, so I'm fortunate enough to be in this position where I had the resources and I had the time to just put my life on hold and just go deep into my own healing and deep into my own journey, my own process. So my responsibility from that is to take that and then go back to where people need it who don't have the same opportunity. And then that became kind of my goal. It's like, all right, the most emotionally healing modality I'd ever experienced in my life was a form of breath work. Wow. So I learned, I stayed in the jungle and I learned Kambo, which is this frog medicine, which is one of the most powerful forms of healing you can do. And then I healed my own porn addiction and my own, I had premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction and zero intimacy awareness. And I started to study Tantra and study with these different teachers and coaches. And basically I healed myself. And in doing so, I learned the tools that I could then help others.
Wow. I'm curious. It sounds like you've been through a lot. Curious about the breath work. I've been fortunate enough to have discovered this rather a few years ago, and I've done sessions with holotropic breathing for 45 minutes. I've never experienced anything like this in my life. You get high on your own supply, and for people that are saying, oh yeah, this kind of sounds familiar, go and try it, and then let's come back and let's have a conversation about it. Was that a similar approach or similar technique that you kind of studied, or?
Yeah, I first studied, like the very first breath work I ever did was holotropic, but the time, the place, and everything, it wasn't right, so it wasn't as effective as I know it to be. I then started to study more subtle forms of pranayama and different techniques that are incredibly powerful, but they're not as physically demanding as the other ones. And then I was in the jungle, and I was almost 3 weeks in the jungle doing a Kambo dieta, where almost every day we're doing Kambo, and which is physically and mentally and energetically really strong. And it was on the last day where we did this breath work, and it's called biodynamic breath and trauma release. And so if you know anything about Kambo, it's a physical, mental, emotional, energetic purge, and it's super intense. And you do it once, twice, 3 times. It's a lot, but in the end, we did it. I think we did 11 days out of 13. So we were kind of spent, and there's a whole bunch of guys there that had been through, even the more powerful psychedelics of the Bufo, the 5-MeO-DMT and Iboga and these types of things. A couple there that were reformed heroin addicts and had been through that journey as well. And we did this breath work, and at the end of this breath work, we're just looking at each other like, holy shit, that was the most powerful thing we've ever done.
Wow.
And at the time, I was having such an intense emotional release during this breath work, and the tetany when your hands curl up, and it wasn't just my hands, like my entire body was. And I just had this flash, and it's like, you need to learn how to do this breath work. So I said to myself, I have to go to California, and I'm going to be in California, I can't remember, until December. And at the end of November, if the breathwork training is somewhere close to where I am, and if the time aligns, then I'll do it. And I look it up, and it happens to start like the second day of December, an hour and a half plane ride away. I'm like, oh shit, okay. And then I get there, and I was still a little bit, synchronicities are one of the most incredible things. So once you learn how to see them and you learn how to follow them, they're breadcrumbs. The universe just gives you these breadcrumbs. It's like, oh, and this is where you're going, and this is how you're going to get there. And you don't even have to worry. It's just like, it's the universe guiding you. So I was in California. I'm like, this is way more expensive than I thought it was going to be. And I thought I still maybe have 12 months left in my travels. Should I really go to, it was in Sedona, this breath work. I'm like, should I really go to Sedona, Arizona to do this breath work? And I'm sitting on the toilet, and I open this magazine, and the first page that I open up, it's got in big letters, Arizona. And I'm like,
wow.
Okay. And then I went into this other room, and 10 minutes later, I turn around and look at my friend, and they have this box, and on the side of the box, it's got written Sedona. I'm like, oh, okay. And within 20 minutes, a friend calls me, and she's like, hey, where are you? I'm like, oh, I'm in California. Are you still here? And she's like, no, I'm staying at my mom's place in Sedona, Arizona. And I'm like, get the fuck out. So within a day, I booked a ticket. I went and did this training. It changed my life. And it's helped others change theirs since. It's a really profoundly beautiful method of breathwork. But they all stem from the same, it comes from Tummo, which is this ancient Tibetan breathwork practice. But basically you're activating the cells in your body that store trauma. And they store trauma from whatever it is, 7 generations, like your parents, etc. And you're in a safe space, and once that trauma gets reactivated in the body, it releases out, and it can release through crying, screaming, laughing, shaking, and then it comes out, and then it's gone. And it's breathwork is a really powerful thing that has absolutely changed my life.
So. Wow. Yeah, I think we kind of went into, my next question is why is breathwork so potent for healing? But I think you kind of already answered that. I can't remember. I was interviewing a previous guest, Evan from Integral Alpha. So he was saying how this notion of traumas and wounds being passed over from generations. I think you talked a little bit about epigenetics, how they've done all these tests with 7 generations of mice and how they passed over the genes. So is that kind of similar how what you're saying as well about these traumas being passed from generations to generations, consciously or unconsciously?
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, if you look at, so I'm 38 at the moment, and my grandfather was in the war. My father was born 8 years after my grandfather came home from war. So, back then in the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, there was no, hey man, take some time, go heal yourself. It was get back to work, put food on the table, put a roof over your family, and there was just no outlet for men to heal or for women. So then my father's born, and he's born to a very traumatized man who has no method or compassion for his own healing, let alone his children. And then suddenly, so my father's carried all that. You're talking 7 generations or whatever of intergenerational trauma that just gets passed down until somebody says, you know what, I'm fucking done with it, and I'm going to heal. Mm. As soon as one person starts to heal, then that stops. That trauma stops. And it's become it's almost a trendy thing to do these days, where people are just doing so much amazing healing work on themselves that the trauma, like these generations of trauma, is actually stopping here. And sure, we're also, the amount of shit that's going on the planet right now, we're creating more trauma. Like these kids that aren't allowed to sit next to their mates and they have to wear masks at school, and like this whole thing is going to create something that I'm not really.
I hear you.
It's difficult to not talk about it because it's so disappointing and so obviously warped, this whole situation. But we're in this society now where if you disagree with the official story, then you're a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, no, dude, just look at the facts. And then suddenly I saw something the other day where families in Canada, if somebody at the child's school has the virus, the children need to be isolated from the parents for 2 weeks in their own home. It's like, well, okay if they set these rules, but you don't have to fucking follow it. And so these parents are like, oh, it's so sad because my kid's in the room screaming because he can't be with me or his brother. It's like, well, you're his parent. Like, you have the right to make that decision to just, anyway, went on a tangent.
No.
This trauma is now going to be, it's like a new generation of trauma that's coming. So yes, it's up to us to do the work on ourselves, because we're constantly creating new trauma anyway.
Oh man, I'm so torn apart about, but what you said. On the one hand, I kind of see, I'm diving more into this men's work and people healing traumas and, all these amazing, great things that are happening, different modalities. It's just a plethora of things that really give me hope. On the flip side, I feel like it's a silent World War III, us versus misinformation, and how if you kind of take a turn from the mainstream narrative, you're labeled as a conspiracy theorist, which, by the way, everything that people predicted that were on that side kind of came true. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, like happy anniversary a year later. I don't know, man. I'm kind of stuck between those two right now. Like on the one hand, it gives me hope. On the other hand, again, I'm happy for people to disagree with me. I just haven't found someone who can actually prove me right that whatever's happening right now is unveiling right now is actually what is genuinely happening. I'm kind of thinking about this kind of a little bit dystopian future that seems to be slowly unfolding, and people are like, yeah, it's fine. Like, how is this fine, man? Like, come on.
Yeah, have you read the book 1984?
Yeah, of course, like 10 years
Yeah.
ago, I think.
So like I remember reading and going, how could society ever get to that spot? How could you get to a point where people would be so stupid that they'll just give up all of their rights out of fear? And then suddenly fast forward to 2020 and it's like,
It could douche.
oh shit, like this is, and now Instagram comes out and says, yeah, we have complete control over your phone, even when it's turned off. Like we can access your camera, we can do it. And everybody's like, yeah, fuck it. I'm good with that. So I was in ceremony a couple of years ago in the jungle and I sat next to this guy. He was from the age of 20 to 45. He was in the American military and he retired and he went straight to the jungle. And for 6 months, he drank ayahuasca straight and really went through some deep processes. And I had this one ceremony with him and he's in tears in the morning. So, tell me, brother, what's going on? And he said, I saw the future of the planet and I saw everything that's going on and I saw, decades and centuries from now, and shit's going to get a whole lot worse, but it has to. Like, this is the process that we have to go through. And the more we heal, and this goes not just for the planet, but for our own personal journey, the more we heal, the more light we shine within, the darker the shadows we pull up. So the more hatred, the more anger, the more like the stuff that's buried really fucking deep is the stuff that comes out last. So yeah, it's easy to heal like the surface layer, but the deeper you dig, then, and this is kind of where we're at, where we're getting to a place in society where there's just so much fear, and this is exactly what the powers of be want, because they want to separate us. So in the end, it's like the only thing you can control is yourself. The only thing that you have power over is yourself. So yeah, it's all well and good to kind of tap in and to get an understanding of what's happening, but in the end, you can't get anybody else to do anything that you want or to change the way you want to be. It's down to you to do that for yourself.
Yeah, I think lead by example. I think that's what we're lacking right now, like really good male role models for people to look up to. Yeah, and that's a very interesting topic that we kind of segued into, but I think it's rather relevant. I've never really abided by PC culture, and that's, I think, just, mental suicide to be politically correct and all these kind of things. A couple of things that come to mind is one, if you really want to see who's in power, see who you're not allowed to critique. That's number one. And number two is all these kind of fact checkers popping up. Before, when the truth came out, all of a sudden fact checkers. And by the way, I really want to do an exercise where we kind of, on the one hand, we see 1984 and then we see 2020 and all the similarities between what was actually written in the book and how accurate that was. The other, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right.
The other thing that comes to mind is a book called The Fourth Turning, and it's basically probably the easiest way to summarize it is with like a very short piece of text, which is: hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And this is each line represents 20 years of a generation worth of 20 years. So 80 years back was World War II. So I think we're stepping into the next 20 years that are going to be really hard times, but also an opportunity for perhaps the old to be kind of flushed away, for the new to be reborn. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. Maybe a little bit esoterical, but all of this, like, go and read the book. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, I know the quote, and you are right. It's like there's a lot of things getting filtered away, and there's a lot of shit. There's a lot of darkness that's getting brought up and brought into the light. And there's a lot of people. I guess COVID's been fucking horrible for a lot of people, but for so many people, it has given them an opportunity to see that the life that they were living was shit, and that they can change it.
Mm.
and they don't have to be stuck in an office, that they can do what they want. They can have a better life.
Mm.
So there is, for every bit of bad there is good, and for every bit of good there is bad. And
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, it was a blessing.
For me too, I hate to say it. I kind of went through the virus in very, very early, I think March last year, because when the whole panic erupted. And afterwards I started kind of educating myself, and I realized, actually, hang on a minute, things aren't as they appear to be. And I was very fortunate to be able to come back to Bulgaria from London, and that was a blessing in disguise. I was able to achieve so many things that previously I thought it's not going to happen for at least another 5 to 10 years. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of perspective, as corny as this sounds, perhaps. um, so we talked a little bit about traumas, and I mean that's a separate conversation. I'm sure we can talk a few hours without any preparation, but I'm also conscious of time. Talk to me a little bit about how did you get into men's work in the first place? Were you aware of even the field of men's work, or?
No, I was in India, and I was in this space. I was coming towards the end of. I was a bit over 3 years into it at this point, and I'd done a whole lot of work on myself, and I'd started to read books, and I'd started to read books regarding men's work and this kind of thing, and I ended up reading King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and The Way of the Superior Man, like back to back. And it was like I had a foot of mud just clouding my vision. And then suddenly with those two books, it just all got cleared away. I'm like, wow, okay, this is why every relationship I've ever been in has failed. And this is why I've lacked purpose. And this is why I can't get it. I can't achieve anything that I fucking put down. Like it just, everything started to make sense. And then at the same time, I was having friends say, hey, man, can you help me? Because I see where you're at and what you're doing, and I want a piece of it. So from that point, I started to go to men's circles, and then I created a program called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and incorporated medicine from the jungle and breath work and sacred sexuality and purpose and shadow work and these types of things. And really started to shift my understanding. It actually completely changed my understanding of what it was to be a man, because I'd never really defined it before. And one of the things that I had seen, or that I had realized, was that it's one thing to heal broken men, but it's another thing to be able to teach children so they can be less broken when they grow up. So I started to write this children's book based on the men's work that I was doing.
Wow.
And then, yeah, it all started to evolve, and I started to do more men's programs and get coaching, and just the deeper I went into it, I started men's circles. So it's about 3 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago. And the shift that you see in men, like especially Germany, it's a very it can be quite difficult being a man in Germany, and it's very difficult for German men to open up and to be vulnerable. So I'd have men's circles, and a guy would come in. There was one instance. This guy came in. He came in probably 3 or 4 times, and the first time he came in, he bought beers. Like, no, dude, this is not what this is about. And he wouldn't share. He'd just sit there and he wouldn't say anything. And then 4 or 5 sessions in, he starts to share, and then he starts to cry.
Mm.
I was like, holy shit, dude, like this is such an incredible transformation. Just from him being able to see that other men do it and it's okay, and you're not seen as less of a man. It's actually a fucking superpower for you to be vulnerable and for you to share the things that are truly on your mind and truly kind of even suppressed in some instances. And I've had men say, you know, that one circle changed my life because I've been carrying this burden for so long, and to finally be able to share it. So from that point on, I started up a men's community called Brothers Seeker. And just as that was starting to get going, Corona happened. So that it's since become an online thing. And then when the lockdown was off, we would do in-person events and workshops and stuff. But that'll be going, you know, we're still in some kind of a lockdown here in Germany, but that'll be finished soon. And yeah, it's now just become very much what my life is focused on. It's because I've been through so much shit as a man myself. And this is one thing that a lot of men don't realize, is that most guys have experienced the same shit.
Mm.
But, you know, be a man, work it out. Doesn't allow you to ask questions and say, hey, dude, I'm going through this. You know, oh yeah, I went through that last year and this is how I got around. Oh, fuck, okay, well, it's not such a big deal.
Mm.
Talking about these things is such a relief. And it's one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. So I'm in the process of talking to a school now to actually do men's circles at a school.
Wow.
So to have these boys, teenagers, sit down and be like, you know, what's present for you, man? Like, what's going on? And it's different now to when I was a teenager. You know, we didn't have social media and we didn't have phones back then.
Mm.
But the premise is still the same. Like, it's these kids are, as you said, they're looking for role models. They're looking for men who have been through the shit before and who have started to heal and really have an understanding of what sustainable, healthy, authentic masculinity looks like. So I'm trying to tap into it from all angles. I have like the men, then I want to get to the teenagers, and then this children's book I'm going for the pre-teens, because, you know, in my opinion, most of the world's problems are because of broken men, and
Yes.
it's we need to heal ourselves first, and then by leading by example, others can tap into it. So.
I hope I didn't interrupt the flow, but man, entertain me on this thought, just off the back of what you said. People, you know, majority, kind of the mainstream, tends to blame patriarchy for a lot of things. And on one side, of course, patriarchy is responsible for a lot of oppression, especially a lot of women being oppressed. At the same time, what I'm personally seeing is that not so much patriarchy, but more of this notion of poorarchy, which is the rule of boys, men, children running the world, and, you know, boys, you know, I think Carl Jung was talking about this, you know, people become developmentally arrested. You know, you're stuck in a phase of, I don't know, 12 or 13-year-old boy in a man's body, 40, 50, 60 years old. So I genuinely see that as probably the biggest problem we're facing right now. But not many people see that. I think when they think of a man, they think of an adult male human being, which is totally two different things. So yeah, curious. It's interesting how you're also kind of saying that as well.
Yeah, if you look at the masculine archetypes, so you have the king, warrior, magician, lover, and they're the archetypes in their full power. So each archetype has two shadow archetypes. You have more of a dominant and more of a passive. And then if you go below that, you have the boyhood archetypes, and they are the divine child, the precocious child, the epidal is the lover, and then the hero, which is the warrior. So the problem in the West is that we don't have a traditional form of rite of passage into manhood. So you have the hero, which is the boyhood archetype of the warrior, and the hero is all about proving to himself and to others that he's a man. The problem comes when you don't have an initiation into manhood, that he thinks he's a man, and then suddenly he goes into physically becoming a man, but there was no psychological threshold. There was no, okay, this is the point where you now become a man. So, and from my own experience, when I was younger, it's like, fuck, what's it take to be a man? Do I get drunk? Do I fight? Do I drive a car? And like, there was nothing for me that distinguished or really defined that crossover, that threshold. So then you have men in men's bodies who are psychologically stuck in boyhood. So everybody's, this phrase toxic masculinity is frustrating because it's not, masculinity is not toxic. It's shadow masculinity, it's wounded masculinity. These are the things, these are the problems that people become so afraid of and become so blame. They put so much of the blame on. It is men who psychologically are not men. And it's these wounded archetypes, these shadow archetypes that are the men in power. Now you look at Donald Trump, it's a prime example of the tyrant, which is the shadow archetype of the king. So for him, it's all about taking power from people. He has to be the best. Whereas if you look at the king is about blessing others and about protecting and providing and knowing that if he raises everybody up, he himself will raise up as well. So the archetypes are a very beautiful way to look at why masculinity is the way it is, because it's got nothing to do with toxic masculinity. It's got to do with shadow masculinity. And men who just don't understand, or men who basically have not yet been initiated into manhood, even though they might be 40, 60, whatever.
Yeah, at a fairly early age, I realized that there's a difference between biological age and psychological age. Like, huge difference. You can be a man in their 60s and still be in the mentality of a 15-year-old boy. And that's kind of the threshold, because there is, like you said, there is no other way for you to be initiated, let's say. Wow. That was a very eloquent explanation. Thank you very much for that. I think you did a much better job than I did. All right, and I'm curious because you're doing a lot of things, and it's kind of already touching a little bit on the question. What do you think we can do as men for future generations and for young kids especially?
I think the most powerful thing we can do for anybody, for the planet, for women, for ourselves, is to heal ourselves, is to realize that we have trauma and that we are, to an extent, damaged, and it is not our fault, but it is our responsibility. So we each are given a different card in life. And some people have it perceivingly easier than others, and others have it worse. But in the end, we are all dealt the hand that we're dealt, and it's up to us to take responsibility for healing that. And when you can lead by example, it's okay for men to feel. It's okay for men to cry. It's okay for men to be angry. It's okay for men to express their emotions. Rather than this old paradigm of don't feel, don't cry, do everything by yourself, work it out, like this. And it all comes from this wounded masculine, this shadow masculine. So just by leading by example, by doing the work on ourselves to become integrated, our feminine and our masculine. This is another one of the problems and you see it in bullies when they're younger, because they fear what is it within themselves, so they don't want to be seen as less of a man. So they fear the feminine that's within themselves. So then they bully others. You take this into adulthood, and you see these men, these macho dudes going around the violent. I mean, the majority of policemen in America, it's like these guys that just wield this power because they can, and they bully others because I would hazard a guess that most of them were bullied when they were younger. So to lead by example, by healing ourselves and by acknowledging that we both have masculine and feminine within ourselves, and to integrate that and to become full within ourselves and to become whole. Because then it gives permission for others to do the same. And I think this is one of the most powerful things. You cannot change others, but by changing yourself, you can lead by example, and people can see what you're doing, and they can actually start to take an interest in it, despite perhaps being hesitant from the beginning.
Beautifully put. Man, we touched upon a lot of things, and I'm just curious, like thinking of which way to go. I'm also conscious of time. So let me ask you this. Was there something that you wanted me to ask you that I didn't?
No, you can take it whatever direction you
want. Let's talk a little bit about sacred intimacy, because I think that's kind of an interjection also about in terms of the work that you have done and you continue to do. Can you talk a little bit about that? What it is exactly? Obviously, the benefits of it, etc.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I had a very lackluster understanding of sexual energy when I was younger. I was addicted to porn. That's how I learned about sex, through porn. I would watch porn continuously through my marriage, and in doing so, really cut the head off any chance of intimacy with my partner. Problems with erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, everything I had. And I went to my first ever Tantra workshop, and the teacher said, okay, go for 7 weeks without ejaculating. Let's see what happens. Jesus, man, I can't go 7 hours. Like, seriously? And I ended up going into 40 days of silence quite soon after this, which was, just short of 6 weeks. And in that silence, you don't masturbate. You're not intimate with anybody. And then, 5 days before I made the end, I had a wet dream. Oh, fuck. I realized that I didn't understand sexual energy, and what this guy had told me, there had to be more to it. So I started to look deeper into it, and I started to get deeper into Tantra. And then started to learn about sexual energy. And through synchronicity and really beautiful luck, I met this teacher in Mexico, and we spent 3 weeks together in the mountains, and she taught me kind of firsthand everything that I needed and wanted to know at that point. So then I was able to start having multiple orgasms and full-bodied orgasms and this kind of thing, and I no longer had a problem with premature ejaculation or erectile dysfunction. But then what I realized was it's okay to, have these skills, but if you still don't understand intimacy and emotional intimacy, especially, then it's kind of, you're missing half the piece. So I started to seek out teachers which really have a very profound understanding, like David Data and John Wineland and Chris Bale. So I'd been through I went to study with Mantak Chia in Thailand, who wrote Multi-Orgasmic Man, and I kind of learned that style of it. And then other teachers, other more traditional and neo-tantra teachers. But then the intimacy thing for me and the polarity and this kind of stuff, it was just a whole new world of understanding and learning. Because for most guys, physical intimacy, when they hear of intimacy, they think physical intimacy. But there's mental intimacy, there's spiritual, there's emotional, there's conflictual, like there's a whole range that men are just unaware of. And the most kind of beautiful piece of it is that the more we can open up into emotional intimacy, the more vulnerable we can be, the more pleasure and the deeper the physical intimacy we will tap into. So the problem for men is that we were told, as a lot of men were told when they were younger, don't feel, don't be vulnerable, don't express. And now we're with our partners, and the partner's like, well, fuck, why won't you feel? Why won't you express? Why aren't you vulnerable? And so, well, I was never taught that. We're actually told to be less that. So one of the common questions I get is, if I am vulnerable, won't she think I'm less of a man? And absolutely not. If you are vulnerable, I mean, it's not about going and just dropping all of your dirty laundry on her and just her being your therapist. But it's about learning how to tap into moments of discomfort. And one of the really powerful yet uncomfortable conversations I have with my partner is that we say, what is uncomfortable for you to share with me in this moment? And, if you're not honest, then what's the point? But, we're very, very honest with each other, and things that are uncomfortable can revolve around feelings that you have for someone. They can revolve around something that your partner did that you really didn't like, but you didn't want to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. Like whatever it is, it's just like you strip naked and you just fucking lay your heart on the board, and in the face of rejection, you step up. And the more you've got to lose, the more vulnerable it is. So for me, 5 years ago, I'd never tell anybody that I couldn't get an erection or a premature ejaculation. But for me, it's not vulnerable anymore. Like I fucking couldn't care less. So for me, being vulnerable means something a little dirtier, a little deeper, a little darker. And the beauty of it is that the dirtier and deeper and darker you can pull up, the more she can trust you. Because for a lot of women, they open up and they're vulnerable, and the man is just like a statue. He's like, okay, and he doesn't receive it, he doesn't accept it, he doesn't return the vulnerability. So she's like, well, fuck, I can't express myself anymore because he's not receiving it. But once you start to offer that to her, once you start to open up and be vulnerable to her, she can trust you even more. And the more she can trust you, the more she can open up. The more she can open up, the deeper the physical intimacy, and the more pleasure you receive. But it's sacred intimacy is a whole world of joy and beauty and pain and everything.
Yeah, it's the entire package. Okay, understood. I'm conscious of time. Man, you've shared a lot of wisdom. I'm very grateful for that. People that resonate with your message and want to learn more about you, where can they do that?
So just on my Instagram, I have most of my stuff, which is at Nic Warner. I also have my podcast called Leaders of Men, where I interview 10 men. Each series is 10 men with the same 10 questions. And it's, basically I've handpicked guys in the men's work field that I've looked up to, and then I just get to ask them the questions that I want to ask them, and it's super vulnerable and powerful and fucking amazing. I have my website, which is nicwarner.com, but basically everything goes through the Instagram. I also have the men's community called Brothers Seeker, which is brotherseeker.com or at Brothers Seeker. And then, everything is there.
Awesome. And just because I speak to a lot of men, and it seems like a lot of the men's work tends to be happening in the US. You're in Europe, you're in Berlin. You used to run workshops, obviously now because of this whole scandemic, let's call it this way. Right now you're not doing any workshops, but normally whenever things kind of ease off a little bit, you're still doing physical workshops. And
yeah, we have a men's circle. We have an English-speaking men's circle every second Monday. So, and then a German one every second Tuesday.
Okay.
But it's free and everybody's welcome, and it's on Zoom, and you can find out through the Instagram when that's on. And then as the scandemic or plandemic, whatever you want to call it, as this starts to wind down, we will do more in-person retreats and workshops. We have a lot of ideas, and just we're not allowed to do them just yet.
Yeah. As they say, free men don't ask for permission. But
but I'm happy to. The problem is if nobody turns up, because
I know. I'm saying it like this. I'm being a little bit facetious, but yeah. All right. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your time. The light in me honors the light in you. And people, hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Please go check Nic's message, his wisdom, his courses, his offerings, as well as Brother Seeker. And I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.
Cheers, man.